Hey there, it's Cory Driver. It's time for Moving Forward. This week we're talking about John 14 and Acts 7. So Thomas and Philip have some questions for Jesus about who he is and who he is in relation to God the Father. Jesus says, "Don't you believe that the Father is in me and I am in the Father? The words I speak I don't do on my own. They do the works of God the Father." So Jesus' words are not his own, but they're accomplishing the work of God. And then further, Jesus says, look, if you don't believe me, just believe on account of the works and see the things that are done through the power of God. And so somehow Jesus' words and his works point to the power of God. And I'm thinking this week about the power of words, what words do, and especially as we're living in COVID times still, what it is that our words accomplish. And to turn to another example, let's look at Acts 7 and the chronicle of Stephen, the proto-martyr. So Stephen gives this long speech detailing about God's faithfulness in the Israelite history and pointing out and recalling all the works of God in and amidst the people, and finally ends the speech talking about Jesus. And for this, and his impertinence to sort of recast Israelite history as the summation of God's works to be capped off in the work of Jesus, Stephen is stoned to death. But an interesting thing happens when Stephen is being stoned to death. The men rushing to get the stones cover their ears. And so there's something about what Stephen is saying that is a threat to them. Stephen's words are powerful even as they are moving to execute him. And Stephen doesn't stop speaking just with the tale of Israelite history or witnessing to Jesus. But as he is being bludgeoned to death by stones, he shouts or speaks with a loud voice, asking for God to forgive his murderers. That's quite the thing. It's quite the thing further to be able to muster the strength to yell, to shout anything, let alone shouting forgiveness and grace. And I feel like those words had to have power too, especially on a young man that was guarding cloaks and garments of those who were stoning Stephen to death. And I'm thinking of Paul of Tarsus. And so just thinking about words having power, Jesus's words are the words of God, and they accomplish God's works, God's deeds, God's powerful acts that testify for themselves. And then Stephen's words, his recounting of history, of the scope of God interacting with the house of Israel, were enough to get people kind of frustrated at him, enough to stone him to death. But then his shouted grace and forgiveness at the end was still powerful, such that even those who were killing him were covering their ears while they did it because they couldn't stand the power of his words. And I wonder what that would look like these days. What would it look like to shout powerfully grace? Especially as we're getting into fights and there's political differences about opening up the economy and opening up businesses and getting back to normal, whatever that means. And some people say this and other people say that, and there's experts, and then there's people on Facebook, and there's all this. I'm cognizant that I am a person on Facebook, so take this for what it's worth. But what would it mean to shout grace? What would it mean to have powerful words that point to God's action, that are undeniably filled with love and grace? And what would that look like for our church? Probably pretty good.